The Missouri History Museum's new exhibit shows visitors of all ages what it was like to be a kid 60 years ago. Joining us is curator of civic and personal identity, Sharon Smith. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
So, you know, the Missouri History Museum, one of my favorite places, and I feel like every time there's a new exhibit out, it's like, and we didn't think of that one before. It's always something new, something very clever. But this is something that I think everyone can appreciate because it's about their childhood.
Exactly. It's really the boomers, you know, all over the city will be so excited to see this. But, you know, it's actually an exhibit not coming out of the Missouri History Museum's collection. It's coming to us from the Minnesota Historical Society. So my point was, I wish we had thought of this because it really is clever.
It is very clever. I mean, and it's interesting because I think within pop culture, it tells so much about, you know, what was of importance to us. But this gives us a different spin on it because it focuses on, obviously, at the time, what sort of children, what sort of engaged them in activities. But let's talk about the exhibit. What can, besides, we'll get through some of the toys that you brought, but what can people expect when they go see it?
You know, what they can expect is really a step back in time, of course, and they're going to find 3 rooms, so a decade per living room, if you will. So in each living room, you kind of get a flavor of the toys of that particular decade, of the 50s, of the 60s, of the 70s. There's a television running with commercials of each of those decades so that you can relive those jingles and those memories of, I wanted one of those and oh, I didn't get that, that kind of thing. It's also a look at how toys change in those 3 decades. So from, you know, if you're looking at how toys were made, basically they were wood and metal in the early years, and how we see that plastic really become so popular by the 70s. You see changes in trends of how dolls look different from one period to the next, or the horizon that's changing from the Western, you know, of the 50s to space of the 60s and the final frontier with Star Wars in the 70s. I mean, you just can watch that as you progress through those decades. It's amazing.
You mentioned sort of change over time, which is really when you're studying history, looking at these changes over time, and those are just great ones that you mentioned. How does that parallel what was going on more broadly during the 50s, 60s, and 70s?
Yeah, a great question, because exactly that's what happened. You really see, you know, the 50s not so much. I mean, we've sort of broken the Western frontier by the 50s, clearly, but it's still very prominent in television, which is actually what is prompting a lot of the toys. So the 50s, the television is just coming in, so they're covering all of those Western cowboy and Indian type stories that we remember. But by the 60s, we're in the space race as a nation, as a world, and you're seeing that reflected in the rockets and the space toys of the 60s. And then by the 70s, science fiction has really kind of come into play, and we're seeing things like Star Wars, you know, all of those like galaxy kinds of shows, that, you know, Star Trek. Those things are really popular in the toys, and everything gets reflected in the board games and the characters, and I mean, it's just amazing to see that.
So when you are looking at everything that was put together for this exhibit, and then you think to now, present day, and obviously technology plays a huge role, what do you sort of take away is sort of the, trying to think of the right word, but is the placement of how the function of toys, does that stay the same in terms of the reflection of the time that it's at? Meaning, for example, 2016, technology is everywhere. A lot of toys reflect that. Have the use of toys or their purpose in our society for children changed? Does this exhibit show you that
I think so. I think the interesting thing is, and you really think about it when you start to look at the 70s, because there's a whole case of the very earliest handheld toys. So we see for the first time Simon. One of the very most popular handheld toys of the 70s is the first electronic games that you start to see today. You know, if we did an exhibit of toys today, how many of them would be toys that were handheld? Or even in the 80s and 90s, when you start to see Mario Brothers and all of those things that we played on the television, you can really see that change. Where in the 50s, it's really about pretend and make-believe so much more, you know, the play sets of the forts and whatever, but you had to really make it up. It wasn't there for you.
No,
yeah,
it's
very different.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting. We've got the information there for you on the screen. It's the toys of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and it runs now through January 22nd. The Missouri History Museum open daily 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then on Tuesdays is when it stays open till 8 p.m. And it's a free exhibit, and for more information, go to mohistory.org. But don't go anywhere. We're actually going to get into some of the toys that are on set with us, so we're going to take a quick break, but please stay with us.